Hey folks, Nathan here. We are taking a look again at another Kickstarter game from All or Nothing Productions. Yes, the same company that did Gloom of Kilforth that we've taken a look at did their second Kickstarter in a very different vein, looking at a historical situation that is the Battle of Hastings in 1066 with the game 1066 Tears to Many Mothers. Yes, that's too many mothers because it's coming from a quote about the bad omen that Halley's Comet brought at the time. This, of course, is the battle between the Anglo-Saxons, the English, and the Normans, sort of the French background folks, led by William the Conqueror, who wind up eventually overcoming the English, taking over and sort of remaking what we think of as Britain, which is one of the major turning points in Western European history. And just like the actual situation itself, Harold leading one side, William leading the other, and the different strengths and weaknesses of either side, and the strategic positioning of either side, we find in history, it wasn't really evenly matched. It was somewhat asymmetrical. And the game really captures this as well. So it's going to be a game that's played slightly differently strategically, depending on which side you happen to be on. But you're able to play as either and see many of the notable figures of the time. All the characters in the game are based on real-life people or real-life archetypes that we see in the real history. It's actually been fascinating to me because I've actually been reading a book on the Norman conquest inspired by having played 1066 here. So we're going to take a look at the game, take a look at its many stretch goals as it developed, what exactly it is that's in this box. And know that playmat there is not actually in the box. That was a paid add-on that you could get as part of the campaign. As far as tiers on the Kickstarter, that's tiers, not tears, of course. The game itself, 25 British pounds, or you can get 2 copies with a pledge for 49 British pounds. And then for 199 British pounds, you can actually have your likeness immortalized as one of the individuals within the game itself. And then for an extra 12 pounds, you could add that playmat there. The design was actually not finalized until after the Kickstarter was over, but it's really nice. And this is a game that really, you're likely to play from either end long ways. It's different than most games. Most games you would figure with a rectangular playmat like this, one player's playing here, the other's on the other side. No. This is a game you're going to probably want to play from either end. Just one of the things that makes this game and its historical focus somewhat unusual. The back of the box here sets up our scenario well. A promise has been made and broken. That is, Harold Godwinson having previously pledged that he would support William of Normandy's claim to the throne after the death of Edward the Confessor, which doesn't wind up happening. Instead, he has the crown himself. An evil omen is in the sky. That's Halley's Comet. A crown is at stake, that of England. And history is about to be made. It is April 1066, and Harold Godwinson, King of England, faces a deadly challenge from Duke William of Normandy. William believes that Harold has broken his solemn oath by claiming the English crown, and the matter must be settled by force, in a battle the likes of which the world has never seen. 1066 Tears to Many Mothers is an asymmetrical, competitive, and non-collectible card game of tactics and war. From award-winning game designer Tristan Hall, this 1 to 2 player game recreates the momentous events of that seismic year in British history. Each player, as either Normans or Saxons, must muster troops and resources to overcome the various obstacles in their way before the two armies clash on the battlefield at Hastings. So again, this is a lead up to the Battle of Hastings and the battle itself. The box contains 173 cards plus 3 bonus promo cards for Gloom of Kilforth, 40 red wooden teardrop tokens, 40 blue wooden teardrop tokens, 22 cardboard attribute modifier tokens, 1 first player token, 2 rulebooks, 1 for full solo play. And down here, kind of setting up the clash, will you rally your Saxon forces to defend the English crown from the invading Norman heathens? Or will you muster papal support and have your Norman army crusade against the usurper Saxons? Obviously, we know how it played out in real life, but how will it play out when you play the game? Now, the campaign's funding goal was £20,000. Again, this is a British pounds currency Kickstarter. At £22,000, sort of, they unlocked Ivory Core cards. But that's something they wanted to do anyway, and they sort of retroactively added it to their games and sort of made it an early stretch goal that basically was guaranteed to be met if it funded. So it's kind of a stretch goal, kind of not. And then we get into stretch goal cards and the different card types we're going to look at. Before we delve into the cards where a lot of the stretch goals lie, let's take a look at the other components, and some of them are going to be stretch goals for us here. So we have the initial rulebook here. That's for the multiplayer, two-player version of the game. I say multiplayer, but just two players. It's one side versus the other. And then if you want to play solo, there's a whole separate rule booklet specifically for that. And it plays very well either way. It's actually fairly challenging if you play the solo version of it. As mentioned on the box, you have your damage tokens that are these wooden tiers, either blue or red, Norman or Saxon, and they weren't initially meant to be wooden, but that was the 29,000 pound stretch goal. That made them wooden. You'll also be utilizing a first player token as you play, and that got some unique artwork, which wasn't originally planned, as this upgraded Dying Soldier first player token right here at the 33,000 pound stretch goal. Not stretch goals, but we have 11 each of these tokens that we'll be using to track adding +1 to our might, which is kind of like an attack value, and our zeal, which is kind of like a belief value. If this is the combat version of attacking, this is more of the spiritual warfare, diplomatic warfare kind of attack. At 37,000 pounds, they added 2 rule reference player aid cards, both of which are different, so that of course you're able to track the game throughout just on those 2 cards. One has a Saxon background, the other Norman. And at 41,000 pounds, they added this nice art postcard into the mix. It's postcard sized, not an actual postcard, but a postcard sized little art print here. For a lot of folks, apparently this was missing when they received their copies. It was missing when I received mine. You just write to them, they'll mail it to you, even if you're overseas as I am. Then we come to the actual cards representing the different sides and different aspects of the battlefield. Each side's going to have a leader card. Okay, they're going to have their own portrait on the back. This is the Saxon King Harold Godwinson. And then, of course, for the Normans, we'll have William of Normandy, aka William Fitzrobert, Duke of Normandy. But they actually wound up with 2 different versions of him in the game. These sides are the same, but they made a mistake, and instead of printing his portrait on the back initially, they actually just put a regular Norman background on it. That's not how you're supposed to play with it. That one's gone. This one's the one you play with, and they provided a little explanation to go with it. Little slip there says, please take these 2 updated cards to replace their namesakes in the game, with thanks from the team at Holler Nothing Productions Limited. Now wait, 2 cards? Yeah. Talk about a perfectionist. This is the other one that gets replaced. Turston Fitzrolf, son of Rollo. Notice it says at the bottom, as bannerman, Turston reputedly carried the papal banner. Double V. They fixed it on the replacement card they provide, so that one's out, this one's in. They did miss one, though. Harold's wife, that is Edith Swanisha. I'm going to mess up a lot of these names. Edith Swanneck, as they called her. It's supposed to say character right there, but they missed it. They're thinking about providing an updated copy of the card with character there, just fixing that error in their next historically based Kickstarter that's going to be based around the Battle of Malta. Now, the way the Battle of Hastings is fought within the game is focused on these 3 wedges and a series of events that both sides have to overcome. So these wedges, as they're called, represent just these huge amounts of soldiers, marked as Wedge 1, Wedge 2, and Wedge 3, with 10 health, so to speak, each. They get laid out like so. They are effectively the locations for the battle for the game. And each side is going to have characters being played at any of those wedges as they play. The first player to defeat 2 of the wedges is the player that wins. Now, as you play, each side has its own set of objectives it has to meet to get to the Battle of Hastings itself, which will allow them to win the game if they can defeat 2 of those wedges. The Battle of Hastings is the 7th of these objectives, and they start with Halley's Comet. We have objectives A through G for each side. This is the Saxon side here. Okay, so you have your objective letter. The first one just automatically proceeds, okay, when you get to that step of that first turn. So basically you have Halley's Comet as the first objective, just automatically defeated. Okay. Then the Battle of Fulford, notice they each have the real life dates. This is B, they're done in order. Each one is going to have either a might or a zeal value here, okay? When you are trying to go after that objective, you're going to add up all of your might or zeal, whichever is appropriate, on the battlefield. That's all 3 wedges at a time. Then compare it to this, okay? If you've beaten it, if you have more, then the difference is damage dealt to that objective. And then once you've dealt damage equal to or greater than the objective's health, so to speak, then you've defeated that objective, okay? There are things it tells you about what's going on, special abilities and things like that, special things in some cases that have to do with solo play, and just like most of the cards, it's going to have some cool historical flavor text. We have the Battle of Stamford Bridge. Great moment for Harold, basically. Surprise, I kicked your ass. You'd have to read the history. I hadn't, certainly until now. March down Ermine Street. Prayer at Waltham Abbey. Gather forces in London. Unfortunately, he kind of jumps the gun. Well, unfortunately for him, at least. And then the actual Battle of Hastings on the 14th of October, 1066. The first player to destroy 2 wedges at the Battle of Hastings wins the game. That's the Saxon side. You may have noticed, by the way, as I was going through the Saxon side, that while the first one's automatic and the last one has to do with the wedges, of the other 5 in between, the first 3 were all might. The last 2 were zeal. We're going to see a shift in that for the Normans. So here's our Normans. The objectives are horizontal as opposed to vertical, as we see on all the other cards. We start again with Halley's Comet, that's automatic. Then War Council at Rouen. Again, I'm going to really butcher the names, especially the French ones. Then we have Papal Blessing and Lawful Claim. Dedication of Matilda's Abbey, that's William's wife. The Normans set sail. Invasion of Sussex. And then Battle of Hastings, same win conditions here. But you notice here, might, zeal, zeal, zeal. Okay, and then the automatic one. So essentially, if you're playing as the Normans, you need to build up your zeal, your sort of papal backing and the people's support before you then rely on might. Whereas with Harold and the Saxons, it's the opposite. You rely on might first and then let zeal take you over the top near the end. So you got to kind of strategically play which cards you're putting out on the battlefield to gain advantages in those particular attributes. Now, as far as your card types and what you've got, we'll look at a Saxon example, but we do have, of course, the Normans as well. You have characters, okay? You have the cost to play it. That can be paid with either resources, which is this value here. If you have any cards on the battlefield with that, you can essentially exhaust them, tap them, in order to gain those resources, or every 1 card you discard from your hand gives you 1 resource. So a cost to play it, a zeal value for battles, a might value, a health value. This just indicates what type of card it is, as does this over here. It'll have a name. It may have some descriptive terms here as far as the type or the attributes of the card, like Saxon, Infantry, Housecarl, that might be referenced by something else. It has an ability. It has the side mentioned by a symbol. Tells you what kind of card it is again over here. Gives you a card number and that great historical flavor text. And some of your characters are sort of generic. Many of them are real-life individuals that are individuals represented by the card, not a type or a group. So you have a character. Similar to that, you have a unit. Okay, unit there. You have an event, which is sort of a one-time use and then it's gone sort of thing, like Shield Wall. You have a tactic that gets played onto your reserves, so to speak, your side, essentially, of the table that can be used when necessary, like English bishops. And then you have an attachment, which you would attach to an existing card to give it some type of bonus, or negative effect if you're attaching it to the other player's card, like Crowning at Westminster, which increased Harold's status. All right, now let's talk stretch goal cards as we go along here before we look at anything more. We start out here with the Lone Axeman for the Normans. This was an event card that was added at £26,000. We then had Edward's Chosen Heir, which is an attachment. It was originally meant to be an event card in the stretch goals at the 28,000 pound stretch goal mark. That's basically where Edward the Confessor is supposedly making Harold his heir. Disputes over whether or not that was actually the case. At 30,000 pounds, we had a new unit added, which was the Norman crossbowman. The most famous story probably coming out of the Battle of Hastings is that Harold is killed by an arrow through the eye, which may or may not be true. There were some stories about how, golly, who had used, bows and arrows in combat before, which was kind of a weird story. But the fact that crossbows were in use, that was kind of an important thing. So not bows and arrows that make it unique, but crossbows were, if not unique, then at least kind of an unusual part of this particular battle, supposedly. All right, so then we have veteran archers at 32,000 pounds. It's a unit there for the Saxons. And then we start getting into some of our individuals. At 34,000 pounds, we have Robert Mortain here for the Normans. Then at 36,000 pounds, the Hatchet Knight Berserker for the Saxons. Then at 38,000 pounds, the Armored Archers for the Normans. Then at 48,000 pounds, the Stealthy Spearmen for the Saxons. Then bringing in tactics here finally, 42,000 pounds, we have the Noble Supporters for the Normans. Another tactic, kind of similar, Magnate Support for the Saxons at 44,000. Then again, another individual at 46,000 pounds, William Evro. I know I didn't say that correctly. I don't think I did. Then we have Edwin, Earl of Mercia, 48,000 pounds. One of these earls that you see within the history quite a bit. Mercia pops up a few times. We have Robert de Beaumont, originally listed in the stretch goals as Roger de Beaumont at 50,000 pounds. Then at 52,000 pounds, we have the Earl of Northumbria, Morcar, who plays a role kind of late in the story. Then we have King Harold Hardrada III, King of Norway. Here, this was at the 54,000 pound stretch goal. One of the more interesting things being that at one point, William wasn't even able to be sure which Harold he was going to be fighting when he did cross over to try to stake his claim. It wound up, of course, being Harold Godwinson. We then have two-handed axes for the Saxons. That kind of rhymed, or I said it wrong and it rhymed. And we have that as an event at the 56,000 pound stretch goal. Then at the 58,000 pound stretch, we have Ivo Talifer, the minstrel. Eaglair, sure. Then at 60,000 pounds, we got Elfwig, the Abbot of Winchester. At 62,000 pounds, Malcolm Canmore, the King of Scots. At 64,000, English Spies. At 66,000, Hugh de Ponthieu. At 68,000, Daggerman Assassin. Then at 70,000 pounds, pretty major figure, Edgar the Eighthling. Basically, who could theoretically have become king, and actually, depending on sources, either was or was about to be crowned, once Harold was dead and William hadn't taken the crown yet. It's a little too young, though. Then we have Saxon Determination at 72,000 pounds. Now, finally, we're back to Norman Crossbowmen, but you'll notice something weird about this one. He doesn't look like the others. Well, that's right, because this is actually a card for Gloom of Kilforth, the original game from All or Nothing, at the 75,249 pound stretch goal mark. The last stretch goal unlocked during the 1066 campaign was to have 3 cards created using art and concepts from 1066 that would be then brought into Gloom of Kilforth as promo cards called the Tears of Kilforth promo cards. We have the Norman Crossbowman brought in as an enemy for the mountains based on Norman Crossbowman, which itself was a stretch goal. We have Saxon Warrior, a stranger for the forest, based on the Saxon Swordsman regular card, not a stretch goal. And then Saxon Noble, which is a quest for the Badlands, based on Eadglith of Mercia, the Christian wife of Harold. Guy had a couple of different wives depending on circumstance. What's interesting is that for me and a lot of other people who were following the Shadow of Kilforth campaign, who learned about Gloom of Kilforth a little too late, and had to do a late pledge for it rather than getting in on the original campaign, this was actually drew a lot of us to 1066, and I found myself drawn into the history of it and delving into the Norman Conquest book, as I mentioned. I am a history teacher, but primarily U.S. history, and then our world history curriculum over here in the West, in the U.S., in Georgia, really only spends maybe a day on anything dealing with William the Conqueror or the Battle of Hastings. It's all part of sort of a very quick zip through that era. So it was cool to be able to play the game, which sparked my interest to read more about it and really get to know a lot of the characters from real history that I'll be playing as and with in the game. The game itself is well balanced. Either side could win as long as you're following the tactics that you need for your particular side. The card counts are balanced in the sense that between stretch goals and regular cards, both sides do have the same number of cards. They are divided slightly differently between a few of the categories, though. Each side, of course, has one leader, as we see. When it comes to characters, the Saxons have 25, whereas the Normans actually have 28. But then for units, the Saxons have 25, whereas the Normans only have 18. Then for events, the Saxons have 18, the Normans have 22. And then for attachments and tactics, they have 5 each of attachments and 3 each of tactics. And that is, of course, not counting those duplicate cards that they tell you to replace, or the Tears of Kilforth ones that are basically promos for Gloom of Kilforth. Now, because I always do, let's run down all the cards. Again, for the Saxons we'll start with, we have the leader, Harold Godwinson, the King of England, or at least he claimed he was the King of England. There's some dispute of whether it was legit. Certainly William didn't think so. Then for our regular character cards, we have Housecarls ×3, Followers ×2, and then we're into Edith Swanisha. I'm going to butcher a lot of these names. I apologize. No character notation there, but again, that'll be a reprint card eventually. We have Essigar the Staller, Stigand, Thurkill White, Leofwine Godwinson, Godric, Harkon, Leofric, Ilgith of Mercia, Walthoff, Brame, Aelfric, Wigot of Wallingford, Edric, Girth Godwinson, and then the stretch goal characters we've already looked at: Daggerman Assassin, Hatchet Knight, Morcar, Edwin, and Aelfwig. Then for their non-stretch goal units, we have Saxon Battle Axeman, say that 3 times fast, ×3. Saxon Swordsman, yes, similar art to one we've seen before, ×3. Saxon Spearmen, ×3. Saxon Axemen, ×2. Feared Archers, ×2. Naturalized Danes, ×2. And now we're into one of each with Feared Peasant Farmers, Saxon Javelin Men, Late Recruits, Local Archers, Shire Levies, Saxon Cyril, or Carol, I have no idea how to say that, and Saxon Macemen. Then the aforementioned 2 stretch goals, Veteran Archers and Stealthy Spearmen. For Saxon events, we have Shield Wall, ×3. Then we have Hot Pursuit, ×2. Bretons Routed, Forced March, Slings and Rocks, Drinking and Singing, Stamford Bridge Plunder, Unhorse the Duke, Bloodlust, Ship Patrols, Plea with Tostig, Local Resources, then the aforementioned stretch goal ones, 2-handed axes, Saxon Determination, there's that art again, and English Spies. For attachments, Ferocious Resolution, Local Advantage, Keldbeck Hill, Crowning at Westminster, another piece of reused art, and then our 1 stretch goal, which was Edward's Chosen Heir. And then lastly, the tactics, English Bishops, English Thanes, and in the stretch goal, Magnate Support. That rounds up the Saxons. And for the Normans, we start with William Fitzrobert, again, the leader. Then for our characters, now is when I'm really going to mess the names up. We have Robert de Vito, we have Robert Fitz Aarons, or Ernies, Robert Ewe, William Mallet, William of Poitiers. This is actually one of the guys whose story of the battle and the story of William and all winds up being one of the major sources for the Norman conquest history that we know. We have Richard Legaz, Walter Gifford, Gerald the Seneschal, Hugh de Montfort, Nicholas, Hugh de Avranches, no, I said that wrong, Roger de Montgomery, Hugh Gardmansil, Odo, Ralph de Tosney, William Fitzosborne, Amory, Alan Rufus, Eldred, Eustace II, Remigius de Fécamp, William de Warang, and Thurston Fitzrolf. That's that one that's a replacement card. Then, of course, we had our stretch goals of Hugh de Ponthieu, Ivo Taillefer, Robert de Beaumont, William Evero, and Robert Mortain. Then for the Norman units, we have Norman horsemen, another Norman horseman, but then Flemish horsemen and Breton horsemen. I like the fact that they take the different nationalities into account. They have Norman swordsmen, Flemish swordsmen, Breton swordsmen, Norman bowmen, Flemish bowmen, Breton bowsmen, Norman macemen, trumpeter, Norman axemen, Norman spear cavalry, stable boys, Norman scouts, then our two stretch goals, armored archers, and Norman crossbowmen. For Norman events, we have retreat or flight, times 2, 700 ships, and flagship Mora, albeit with the same art here. Tostig Godwinson, that's kind of the last major villain of the piece, so to speak, before the clash between Harold and William. Tostig's invasion, that's the event. Knights break through, break for food, arrow in the eye, the way that legend tells. Harold gets taken out, although there's some dispute as to whether that's actually the case or if he was more hacked to pieces and his manly bits carried a distance away and so on. Burn and pillage, William's counterattack. William not dead. There's a point in the battle at which it's believed that William is dead and he has to sort of show that he's not to rally his troops. Preparation at Dives, I don't think I'm saying that right. Orkney Vikings, cavalry trample, Harold's illness, fared desertion, rout enemy, break the shield wall. Then our three stretch goals, Malcolm Canmore, Harold Hardrada III, and Lone Axeman. For attachments, just regular, no stretch goals, Tostig Rally's support, Ridge fortifications, praying and confessing, Castle on the Hill, and Papal Standard. William got the Pope's support before going into battle to try to take control of England. Then for tactics, there's just one regular one, feudal levies, and the two stretch goals at Edgar the Eighthling and noble supporters. I'd also note before we wrap this up that there was a 51,000 pound stretch goal that was supposed to be to have a full version of this game in digital form on Windows and Apple platforms, at least based on the imagery that was used. That kind of fell apart. There have been a few attempts to try to get that back off and running again in recent times, including one where some university students put together a playable version of the game. But as far as I know, that's not something that's in the near future in the cards, if in the cards at all, at this point. So don't hold your breath for a digital copy. You'll want to pick up the physical one if you're interested in the game. Personally, I find this to be a really fun, really cool game, very enjoyable, and you'll learn a lot from it if you're interested in this time period of history. I will note that one of my favorite concepts is the fact that while you're trying to go after these wedges as you play, it's going to depend on whether or not you are actually at the Battle of Hastings, whether you can use your might or only use your zeal to deal with trying to destroy any of those wedges. And part of that is going to come down to what happens, for instance, if there's a tie and that sort of thing. The mechanics work a little bit differently, whether you're talking about a zeal battle or a might battle. But I like the idea that, in essence, might is what's going to wipe out troops more quickly, right? But zeal can also affect the morale of the other side, and you may still wind up dwindling down their numbers even if it's not a direct battle yet. I really dig the thematic nature of this. So again, another great All or Nothing game produced in conjunction with funding through Kickstarter. I did mention that it was a £20,000 initial funding goal. If you actually look on the Kickstarter page, it is a little bit of a contradiction. There's one point where it also refers to it as 19,500. But either way, it managed to get 75,366 British pounds as its final funding. I really enjoy it, and I'm looking forward to their next Kickstarter coming up, which I believe is for the spiritual successor to this about the Battle of Malta, which is 1565 St. Elmo's Pay.